Well, the question that I've been asked to look at this time is, how can we know if the stories in the Bible are true? And rather than thinking about the whole of the Bible stories, because, to go through everything, Old Testament and New Testament, I think would take ages. So what I'm going to do is just focus on the Gospels, because like we were thinking a bit about in the last question, we were thinking about how, whether there are any original copies of the Gospels left and how we can, of the Bible left, and how we can trust that. I think the Gospels are really the heart of the Bible. And, if we can trust what the Bible says about Jesus, about his miracles, particularly about his resurrection, then we can trust the rest of the Bible. There's much better case for trusting the rest of the Bible if those core things are true. And so that's what we're going to think about today. We're going to focus on the Gospels. There's just one book that I want to tell you about, and it's called Can We Trust the Gospels by Peter Williams. It's a fairly new book, and in my opinion, it is the best book on trusting the Gospels that's ever been written, certainly that I've ever read. It's a really fantastic book which looks at the different evidence for why we can trust the Gospels. So let me take a moment to run through 2 or 3 things that he mentions about why the Gospels are true, but I hope that this is just something which will lead you to go on and look in more detail at the book. So one of the things he mentions is geography. He mentions the fact that all 4 Gospels talk about specific places, and the places that they talk about range from being well-known places to quite obscure places, at the big and small places. And each of the Gospels, they talk about some places which are common to all of them, and they each also talk about places which are mentioned only in those 4 Gospels, and use names which are only contained in those 4 Gospels. And the point that he makes is, it would, if someone was not familiar with the area, if someone was lying, basically, how would they come up with all of those names? He says that there's no way, unless someone had done kind of research which is beyond anything we know from antiquity, how would someone actually be able to come up with those names, accurate names, which someone from those regions would know, especially the more obscure and sort of regional names for places. So that's one thing, that the geography of the Gospels is correct. The second thing is undesigned coincidences. So this is when something is said kind of almost as an offhand remark in one Gospel, which is then confirmed by another remark in another Gospel, and the two things are not designed, as it were, to be in cahoots. So one of those things, for example, is Mark. He gives a sort of offhand remark in his Gospel. He calls James and John the sons of thunder. And again, when you look in Luke's Gospel, we see them doing something. They're not called the sons of thunder, but they talk about how they, call down fire. Should we call down fire from heaven on this particular village? That's in Luke chapter 9. And again, there's these little coincidences which come up, which just seem to suggest that Mark and Luke and they knew these people, and these are actually true and real people who they're talking about. This isn't made up, but this is actually real people and real events that are being talked about. Now, he makes the point that if it wasn't for the miracles of Jesus, no serious historian would consider the Gospels to be anything other than a generally reliable account of what happened. It's only the miracles which actually make people pause for thought. Everything is reliable. Now, let's just think about the miracles, because I know that this is something which people do. I mean, when they ask this question, the miracles, the resurrection, that is the thing I think which most people have in mind. Can I really trust in the miracles of Jesus? And let me just finish off by giving you 3 things to think about, which I think make it much more likely that the Gospels are true. The first thing is that it fits with the rest of the Bible. Now, the resurrection and the miracles of Jesus don't just happen on their own, but they fulfill prophecies from the Old Testament. They kind of fit with the whole story of what the Bible is saying. Now, it will be one thing for someone to come up with a story about a man who did miracles. It will be another thing for hundreds of people writing over thousands of years to come up with a coherent story which culminated in a man like Jesus doing miracles and rising again. I think you would have to it would take a leap of faith beyond anything that we've ever known to believe that all of the Bible and what happened with Jesus was just a fiction and it just happened by coincidence. When you look into the way that the Old and the New Testaments come together, when you look at the way that the resurrection kind of it fulfills what God wanted to do and so on, all of that, it just hangs together so beautifully. I think there's no way it could be made up. The second thing is that the resurrection turns the disciples around. Through the Gospels, they're seen as this kind of bumbling band of people who just constantly get things wrong. And I think if they were making it up, why would they make it up to show themselves in a bad light? But the resurrection changes things, and especially it happens on the day of Pentecost. They go out and all of a sudden they're men who go out and want to proclaim the gospel and who even face horrible persecution and death for this claim that Jesus rose from the dead. You have to account for what turned the disciples into fearful people who were scared, into people who would go out and proclaim that Jesus really was alive. If it wasn't true, and if they knew it wasn't true, why would they do it? Because Jesus appeared to all sorts. It says it appeared to people in small groups, in large groups, and many people over the course of time. And if you could just go and ask them, did Jesus really appear? And he hadn't, then why would you do it? And the third thing is a little unusual thing, this, but the first witness of the resurrection was a woman. Now, in our day and age, we don't really see any issues with that. But in the first century, that women's testimony was not admissible in court. So if a woman had said, "Oh, Jesus has risen," then the people in the first century would have said, "Well, we don't believe her. They can't testify in court. Women can't testify in court." So if you were making up the story about the resurrection, why on earth would you want to undermine your case by making the first witness of the resurrection to be a woman? In those days, that would have been a silly thing to do, unless it's actually true. And so I just want to finish with that. There's just one little quote from Sherlock Holmes which I wanted to think about really, which is that when you've eliminated the impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I think that is the case actually with the resurrection, that although it might seem improbable, although it might seem like it's impossible, actually when you've eliminated the other things, and I think all of the other explanations are more impossible, then the resurrection has to be the truth, and the miracles of Jesus, and by extension the rest of the Bible, has to be the truth.